Good morning, good afternoon, good day, and welcome to ISD's series, America's Diplomats. I'm Ambassador Barbara Bodine, and I'm the director of the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown. A core mission of the Institute is to connect students with foreign policy professionals to better understand the rewards and the challenges of diplomatic careers, and also to promote excellence within U.S. foreign policy. The series is intended to do that by encouraging all Americans to consider careers in foreign affairs. In this series, we engage with a wide range of foreign policy professionals who have served with distinction over many decades and often in very difficult situations. They exemplify the highest standards of professionalism and commitment, and they manifest the rich cultural legacy of the United States. They have served around the world advancing U.S. interests and American values and principles, what America stands for. And as I said, sometimes in very difficult circumstances. For this series, we're very proud to collaborate with the Una Chapman Cox Foundation, which is bringing you this session as part of their larger project on American diplomacy and the Foreign Service. Our interviews are available in their entirety on the America Diplomats website, which we will share with you with this screenshot. And we continue to build our library. We are now in our 9th year, and we have about 50 interviews. So please do take a look at the library. Today, I am very honored to welcome a career diplomat and a trailblazer, Ambassador Robert Gilchrist. A native of Leesburg, Florida, Ambassador Gilchrist graduated with a BA from Wake Forest University and an MA from the University of Virginia. He most recently served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, a bureau that I believe no longer exists.
Not in its previous form, no.
Yeah, not in its previous form. His career spans decades. He also served as U.S. Ambassador to Lithuania from 2020 to 2023, as well as leadership positions in the Department of State's Operations Center or Crisis Center, and as Director of Nordic and Baltic Affairs and the Department's Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. You may have a few comments about what's going on that. And he was also Deputy Chief of Mission, the Assistant Ambassador in Sweden and Estonia. Among his earlier assignments, Ambassador Gilchrist served in Iraq, Romania, and Special Assistant in the Office of the Deputy Secretary of State. It is a very distinguished and remarkable career. Ambassador Gilchrist not only brings very deep institutional knowledge, but also a passion for mentorship, which we've been talking about before we started filming, a reputation for personal and professional integrity, and a career defined by excellence in service. So Ambassador Gilchrist, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me here.
Yes, we're absolutely delighted. We like to start our conversations by looking back at the beginning of diplomatic careers to understand what initially attracted you to foreign affairs and this very odd career called diplomacy. What steps and what processes led you to decide on this? And in other words, what is your origin story, please?
My origin story, as you pointed out in my biography, started with Leesburg, Florida, which is a small town in central Florida, about an hour north of Orlando. And when I grew up, it was all orange groves.
Yes.
And in many ways, a very remote place. But I always knew that there was a bigger, greater world out there. This is before the internet, so I'm sure you've had many people you've talked to.
Yeah.
And so our ability really to understand fundamentally what diplomacy was quite limited, especially for someone from there. But I had very good teachers who inspired me and who ensured that I knew that there was a bigger world out there. I was addicted to reading everything that I possibly could about the news, about history.
Yeah.
And I remember actually when I was maybe in 8th grade, a teacher asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I said I wanted to be an ambassador. I did not know, didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
And then when I was in college, I walked by sort of the guidance office and saw an advertisement for the foreign service exam. And that was really, it was something as basic as that, that actually led me to take the exam and to pursue the career that I ultimately pursued. I, it's a poli-sci major and all of that sort of stuff. I don't know that I knew exactly what a foreign service officer was. And that's what I learned actually on the job in many ways. But it was sort of a series of steps that led me in this direction. But I think in some ways, from an early age, I knew that it was where I was going to go.
Yeah. Having grown up near California orange groves, I understand what you're talking about. And that sense that there's got to be something more out there somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I took also that I joined the Foreign Service to get as far away from Leesburg as I could. But
that's my line. That's my line on why I joined the Foreign Service. I was running away from home. So you've served in a wide range of countries. Thinking back on your early postings, as you were saying, when you were actually learning what being a Foreign Service officer meant, what pivotal lessons did you learn, and how did they shape the way you approached your work going forward?
A position that I often look at in terms of my formation as a Foreign Service officer was my second assignment in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez was in jail at the time. This was from 93 to 95.
Okay.
And I was the junior officer, we called them then, in the political section, but also the human rights officer. And this was a country that had gone through violent riots, mass graves. There were, and I suspect still are, prisons that are the most inhumane in the world, and rapid corruption and really dire problems. And I had a great ambassador, Jeff David Dow.
Oh, yeah.
A mentor.
Wonderful person.
And I really immersed myself in that portfolio. And I worked a lot with civil society. I almost, it's easy to say don't go native, but I felt so strongly about what they were doing and how they were doing it, and worked so hard to find ways to assist them, and also to highlight the dire problems in Venezuela that I felt I had an impact, but also I learned a tremendous amount. And in many ways, in successive assignments, sort of that key commitment to human rights and that focus on it always remained a part of my career, and something that sustained me, not just when I returned to DRL or in other situations like that, but really in everything that I did as a foreign service.
Yeah, I think your early tours really do shape you in so many ways, but they often also allow you to bring out something in you that was already there, and to see that you can have an impact on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good way for looking at it. I think that there was a strong interest in that area, and also, quite honestly, I think that the United States is at its best when we represent democracy, when we advocate for human rights. I mean, I think that's the core of our self-diplomacy.
Yeah. The core of our values.
And so I think that's when the United States is strongest, and it had this opportunity at a very basic level to learn and to have an impact.
Yeah, that must have been really quite remarkable to be able to do that. And yes, having an ambassador who will let a junior officer run with that too.
Sure.
And to kind of play on that a little bit, the opportunity to serve as a diplomat is a tremendous privilege. It's also a unique set of challenges. We've started talking about them, but could you maybe expand on what are some of your most inspiring moments, and perhaps some of the ones that were the most difficult, and what you took away from each, the highs and the lows?
It's interesting, as I say, that being a career foreign service officer, in many ways as an opportunity to have a front row seat to history.
Yeah.
And you often don't realize that you're witnessing it, or that you're there, until it actually happens. Or oftentimes you look back and you see what happens. I often think of the moment. People say, "Where were you on September 11th?" Well, I was special assistant to Richard Armitage,
Oh my goodness.
Deputy Secretary of State, while Colin Powell was in South America, traveling. So I was there. And I think for many of us, we saw on television a plane hitting the World Trade Center, and it starts out seeming like something small. Until you realize that it's actually something.
It was the second plane that.
Yeah.
I remember my thought was, oh, this is a terrible accident because there's 3 airports around New York City and something terrible has happened. And then the second plane hit and you realize, no, this was not an air traffic control problem.
Something fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And actually what's interesting is, at the time, the deputies committee was meeting inside of the deputy secretary's office. And we staffers were outside sort of looking at this and thinking it was something small. And then when we realized that this was not just some small accident, we asked his assistant, his OMS, office management specialist, to take a note in to the senior levels of the State Department making decisions about who was going to be ambassador. And very quickly, folks filed out. The head of our counterterrorism office looked at me and said, "Is it terrorism?" I said, "We don't know.
What else would it be when you have the second plane? But we don't know." And
then in the successive moments here, the deputy secretary was quickly trying to find means for him to reach out to other parts of government, help him get into the operations center, for secure call with others to try to assess what was happening. Meanwhile, he's sort of managing the entire department to ensure that folks knew that they needed to begin finding out. And then we saw smoke from across the river at the Pentagon
was hit.
And so here I found myself beside the man who was the acting Secretary of State during this crisis. And
we can actually see the Pentagon from the State Department.
Yes.
So when you say you saw smoke, it literally is looking out the window and realizing
that something is happening.
Something
that isn't normal.
Yeah.
And seeing how he managed to remain calm and steady through this crisis was something that I think I'll never forget. And I'll also never forget sort of being in his inner office as we watched it on television and saw the towers in flames. So I know that it's a slight divergence from your question, but I think it, when I talk about our ability to have a front row seat to history, I felt like in many ways I did. And in the ways that I could assist him, in the ways that I could ensure that everything was going correctly, or in our decision to ensure they knew inside that something was happening, that maybe there's a bit of an impact that one can have. That was on a staff level.
Yeah. And also, I think you mentioned, just being able to watch someone like Rich Armitage, who was remarkable, and just seeing how a senior leader really steps up when you've got a ambiguous and then evolving and then clearly horrific incident, and what he does, that what a leader looks like when they step up to a crisis.
Right. And I would say that sort of he was the leader for that moment in terms of his ability to remain steady, to look out for the troops, while he at the same time was doing what he could to look out for our president and our nation. It was an amazing moment that I'll never forget.
Yeah, I can well imagine that. What is some of the more difficult? I mean, in some ways, this was a difficult moment, but maybe personally or in your own career, where you really felt challenged or conflicted or define difficult any way you like.
I had the honor of serving in Baghdad from 2006 to 7 in the green zone. I often joke there's nothing green.
There's nothing green about the green zone. Yeah.
Nothing green about the green zone.
I serve there too, and I can assure anybody who's watching this, there's no green in the green zone.
But it was, in many ways, it was an experience that was completely different from a lot of my other experiences in circles, in that the embassy compound was being constantly attacked. We had LE staff killed. Yeah. Those are our local employees. Yes, our local employees killed by Al Qaeda. And an embassy team that was working practically 24/7. So people were exhausted. And for me, it was a tremendous lesson in personal resilience, in staying sane under really intense duress, literally attacks. Yeah. Which somebody is trying to kill you. Somebody, actively trying to kill you, but also at the same time, being a leader to your team, to others who are looking to you to remain calm. Who are looking. Your Rich Armitage moment. My Rich Armitage moment, to some degrees. I was deputy political counselor under Margaret Scobie, Ambassador. Yes, I know her. Who was political counselor at the time, and so what I learned really was, first of all, about myself and how to look for strategies for remaining resilient and calm under duress, but also trying to lead others and to help keep them calm. And what was interesting is, from time to time, I would get feedback like, "You kept us sane." And I was like, how did I do that? I was barely holding on myself. And again, there was so much happening. Senior leaders coming and meeting with the Iraqi leadership. We had provincial reconstruction teams all around the country that we went and visited, that were also being attacked, and colleagues were being killed. So I learned a lot about personal resilience, and I learned a lot about the value of having a strong team and being really a good colleague. Yeah. I think that people part of diplomacy, that this is not an intellectual game. It's very personal. It is. Very people centric. Beyond Rich Armitage, who else has been your inspiration or your major mentors, and what did you learn from them? There's so many. There are a lot. Yeah. I mentioned, Deputy Secretary Armitage, ambassador in Venezuela, Jeff David Howe, but there are others. Mary Ryan early on was the class mentor. A remarkable woman. Maura Hardy, and that's probably a name you hear often, and Maura might be even watching this, but she's someone who really took seriously her role as a mentor to all of us. And there's so many others. And Michael Guest, who was the first publicly gay ambassador, and I had the opportunity to work directly with him in Romania. I was his full counselor. And I think a fundamental thread of them is that they took seriously their role as mentors, and also decent colleagues. And colleagues who you respected tremendously, but who didn't derive the respect by yelling or being rude or berating people, but actually by caring about the institution and caring about those they worked with. And for me, it was quite important to have role models like that, because early on, when we first came in, it was a much more hierarchical organization. And there were, particularly in the early 90s, folks who got ahead through yelling. And we can think of a few. Oh, I know. I'm running through a list of names right now. Yeah. But the ones I really looked to are the ones who didn't do that. And they helped me a lot. And they were ones I could go in and talk to and help or support. With some exception, I know that
you know, some of the people who, to kind of simplify it, were just kind of jerks.
Yeah.
Often didn't really succeed. They would have a burst of success, and then at a certain point, they had no backup because the people above them could see what was going on, and the people below them obviously knew what was going on. And that quite often, we all stumble. And does anybody have your back? And often nobody had their back, and it was just kind of like, you were going to do this all on your own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fine, you're all on your own.
Yep.
Yep. And it's just like, bye. Mentorship is critically important, and you've described some of the best people we've had in the Foreign Service. How have you sought to pay this forward?
How have I sought to pay my way forward on there, or to help others?
To help others, to support others, to be that person who is mentoring, giving back support.
I think there's sort of different ways. One, my mantra, and I really established this when I was director of the operations center.
Yeah.
Where historically we've had really some of our strongest officers go through.
Yes.
And I made it my mantra that I wanted a happy, healthy, productive op center.
Mm-hmm.
I moved that on when I was ambassador. Happy, healthy, productive became really what I said repeatedly, and I integrated in terms of how I operated. Even when I was back in the department in DRL, and in the Foreign Service, in the State Department, or at embassies overseas, even more in many ways, it's fundamentally important that we work well as a team.
Mm-hmm.
All of us want to go into a workplace where people are happy and healthy and productive, and that's what I always focused on. And I've also, I integrated as an officer the importance of being a good colleague.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend. And if you're a good colleague and a friend, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
I think it opens up a lot more opportunities than if you're a jerk.
Yeah.
Or if you're a problem for an embassy or for an office.
Yeah. That toxic personality can sour an entire embassy.
And I think it was surprising to me to see that for some people, that philosophy doesn't necessarily come with them. And I think that's been my weakest spot, as I operate with the assumption that everybody recognizes that this is important. Not everybody does, but those who do, and you integrate it in terms of how they are as Foreign Service officers, I think stand a much better chance of succeeding. Yeah.
I totally agree with you. To shift the conversation just a little bit, first of all, I'd like to remind the audience if you have any questions for the ambassador, to please put them in the Q&A box, and include your name and your affiliation, as well as obviously the question, and please do make it a question. You served a long time in the former Soviet bloc, and then in the newly independent states. Like I'm an Arabist, so I'm not sure I always get that language right. How do you as a diplomat, and then how as you as a leader and a mentor, adjust to rapidly changing political environments? We change presidents every 4 to 8 years, and there's always a break and a change. And how do you get through that, and how do you help others get through a change in the priorities, a change in the tone, a change in the policies?
I mean, it can be hard.
Yeah.
I know that currently there's a transition that's a bit more abrupt than previous transitions have been.
Yes.
But every transition in administrations has been a challenge. The first 6 months or so, you have to learn to frame things differently. You have to learn to try to read what the priorities are of an administration. You also have to recognize that the decision-making process floats around in the State Department and in the U.S. government.
Yes.
And you have to be flexible in terms of identifying who the key players are, the key decision makers are on a particular set of issues. And it is a challenge for the desk officer writing the talking points and still operating as he or she did before, but also for those who are leaders in the department or overseas in terms of helping guide the ship. It's our job first and foremost to implement policy. I think sometimes that can be a challenge for folks to remember, but I think we always have to recognize that, and guiding the ship is hard, but we have to keep our eye on the ball. And then secondly, going back to that whole philosophy of happy, healthy, productive, that's still there. Yeah. And you have to watch out for folks who you're working with, your colleagues, those who are looking to you for guidance and help them make that transition as well, which can be a big challenge.
Yeah. Over the course of your career, the Foreign Service and the State Department have evolved. We were talking about this before the cameras started to roll, and it's still needs to evolve. It's going to be a work in progress forever. How do you see how we meet the demands of this much more complex world?
We have to change.
Yeah.
As a Foreign Service officer, we have to be flexible. I think there's often a tension within the State Department between tradition, because we are a very traditional type of organization in many ways, and conservative in many ways, and also the need to change and evolve. I think in terms of policies, it's been amazing to me is seeing issues that didn't exist 30 years ago when I joined the Foreign Service that now are central in what we do. When I first joined, the big conversation was about narcotics assistance, NL. Right. And then to see the set of issues such as counterterrorism, which became central in our foreign policy, cybersecurity, which didn't exist.
It did not exist at all.
The threat of disinformation.
Right.
The many different components of our foreign policy that have evolved over time. Yeah. And so I think as a Foreign Service officer, you have to keep learning. I felt like, during my 34-year career, I learned something new every day. Absolutely. And so you keep learning as the world evolves. And then as a career professional, you also look at how that matches the priorities of the administration and how that matches U.S. interests. Yeah. That's, I think, at the core of it, what a Foreign Service officer actually does. So I have seen so many changes. I think as an institution, the Foreign Service has changed from being very hierarchical to being hierarchical, but a lot, certainly more diverse. And the concept of a 360 didn't exist. Yeah. Could you imagine Richard Holbrooke getting a 360? I want to work on that one for a while. But that concept and the concept of leadership that Colin Powell brought to us, which I think fundamentally changed our institution for the next few decades in terms of how we saw leadership. Not just training, but in terms of how we approached it and how it became really integral in how we were as officers. It's been amazing seeing how that changed, and I think there's still a lot more to work on that. But I think. Yeah, there is in the military this concept of command culture. That if and I think Colin Powell represented that best. Who he was and how he dealt with people, how he dealt with institutions, how he dealt with subordinates and peers. Was kind of a master class. And I always thought, for those who don't know, that Rich Armitage, who was his deputy, was much more gruff and much more the Navy SEAL, but still had the same command culture. You could see two different ways of manifesting the same values and the same leadership between Colin and Rich. And they worked together very well, but they reinforced each other. They weren't counterpoint to each other. Yeah, and they were best friends too. Oh,
very, very best.
Seeing the secretary and the deputy secretary interact like bros or whatever they were,
Yeah.
basketball playing friends, was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
A little bit more on your most recent position as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. And how did you work, and how did you work with your staff to be an effective negotiator with issues that are important to us, sometimes with partners or even adversaries who might not hold the same values?
Well, I had the opportunity in that position for about 9 or 10 months to actually be senior bureau official. So definitely acting assistant secretary.
Yeah.
We had a confirmed assistant secretary towards the end, so I moved back to being the principal deputy, but I was SBO for about 9 or 10 months. Human rights is, I carry the philosophy, but I think there's also been a lot of continuity throughout administrations on this. So human rights is a core component of U.S. foreign policy. Respect for human rights and the promotion of democracy in its own right is an objective, but also in many ways it complements so what we do more broadly as a key component of, I would say, American soft power. As in DRL, I think we had a challenge in the building ensuring that was always a component of talking points.
Yeah.
And so there were, constant turf wars and all those sorts of things that we did quite well, or ensuring that we were at the table at key moments, and that could sometimes be a challenge. But I also think with in our interactions with other countries, our relationships are complicated.
Yes.
And there are many different U.S. objectives, many U.S. core interests at stake. And I would say every relationship we have internationally, every bilateral and multilateral relationship that we have. And so we could talk to a country about energy issues, counterterrorism, a long list of core interests, but at the same time say, and this. Yeah. And then look at the tools that we had for trying to affect that change. First of all, not shying away from discussing, key human rights concerns. While at the same time still advancing our interests on multiple levels. So I think it meant a lot of blunt conversations. But I actually think the United States is at its best when human rights is really essential in what we do.
Right. You bring up that hopefully synergy, but sometimes conflict between functional bureaus and regional bureaus, and you serve both abroad and some senior positions in the European Bureau. And how did your sense of how you balance the more conventional diplomatic issues that you saw as an ambassador, or you saw when you were in the European Bureau, with the perspective of a functional bureau, DRL, particularly since it included, one of our core foreign policy objectives, which is human rights and democracy. So how did you kind of talk to yourself about, I'm going from this perspective to this perspective?
I mean, I think it was important for DRL to be a gadfly. It
often did it very well.
So it was important for DRL to be there and in the building, but also operating, with embassies, to say, wait a minute, don't forget this. Wait a minute, you have to ensure that you're talking about, putting in place legislation that protects women from domestic violence, that you have to take steps on human rights, or with some of our more complicated relationships, that you have to take steps towards democracy. So I think, we operated as a gadfly. Although for the most part, I think that sort of human rights policy had been integrated into it, became part of the DNA of the State Department.
Yeah.
And I think that that happened increasingly over time as people became more and more familiar with issues, as the Bureau grew, as our interests and readiness to speak out on human rights increased over several decades, I would say. So we often found easy audiences in other bureaus, but not all the time. They didn't like us when we sort of stepped in and said, well, you need to talk about this too.
Right.
But then you could also see on the other side of it sometimes change. And I still believe that when our foreign policy stays grounded in human rights and democracy, that over the long term we benefit by that. Because populations see that, people see that.
Yeah.
They remember. And we generate support perhaps not in the halls of government, in various capitals where we are, or sometimes among the elite, but we do with the people. I think we generate a lot of support that way, which elevates our ability to have leverage in lots of different ways.
Yeah, our values is one of our key interests, and I think sometimes it isn't. It's listed third. It's security, economic prosperity, and values, and it's not actually a priority order. It's a triumvirate.
But they're all linked together.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. They're all linked together.
Yeah, it's not we'll get around to the human rights and the democracy third.
Yeah.
It's how do you weave them together? So yeah. One other question that we just got from a student is how do you define success? I think most people would say you have had a very successful career, but how do you define that? And did it change as you progressed or as you grew, as you matured?
It's really hard because sometimes in the Foreign Service, you don't see the success until a few years later, you go back and look at something you did and see the results of what happened. That was always interesting to me. I mean, oftentimes when we moved on to another assignment, you move on and close that chapter. But the reality is there are things that you could do that would have an impact over time. And I even go back to the second assignment in Venezuela, where I was able to locate sources of funding for NGOs that continue to operate for decades after I left. And so I could see that as a success, although during the time I was located on the embassy simply working with these groups. So sometimes you don't see it until much later. I think in terms of policy, it varies so much. When you see that you've achieved a goal that when you're in the middle of a complicated situation, you can't see your way out, and then you ultimately see it. When I was ambassador in Lithuania, Lithuania allowed the Taiwanese to open an office, and they called it the Taiwanese Representative Office, which provoked a response from the People's Republic of China, which threatened to do what it could to bring Lithuania to its knees economically. And I quickly reached out to my superiors, even though I was ambassador in the department, to look at ways that we could support Lithuania. And what I got back from the White House and from the senior levels of the State Department, including the secretary, is we stick with our ally and we do what we can. And there was very strong support for Lithuania, both in terms of helping Lithuania engage with its EU partners. But also in demonstrating bilaterally our strong support, and Lithuania withstood it and became, I think, a prime example of a country that could step up to Chinese pressure, strong pressure from the PRC on a political issue, and I think in some ways be a model for other countries. And so ultimately, I see that as a success, although in the middle of it all, it's a bit complicated, a bit difficult.
The State Department and diplomacy does not operate. We're not the sole. We maybe consider ourselves the core, the primary, but we're not the sole actors. And kind of at two different poles in the universe of partners that we work with. Couple. one is our NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and I think particularly in your human rights and democracy focus. And then also in a number of the countries that you've served in, we'll put Baghdad aside because that's kind of unique, but in other posts, our military partners are also there. And how, while they're partners, and we certainly need to work with them, want to work with them, we have to work with them. Sometimes they are, I'll use a military term, a force multiplier. And sometimes they can be a little bit of an obstacle. How did you manage this diffusion of authorities and diffusion of partners, and with it a diffusion of perspectives when you were trying to balance the complexity of relationships?
If you're a Foreign Service officer and you're only walking through the halls of government and only speaking with government interlocutors, you're not doing your job. You're not doing your job at all.
Yeah.
And no, I always reached out to civil society organizations and identified who were the key players and who had influence. I think as a political officer, but also more broadly as a Foreign Service officer, I always ensured that I was speaking with the opposition, that I was looking more broadly at what was going on, because ultimately it's our job to look at the terrain and see how we can have an impact. And there are a lot of different levers for doing that. And the opposition member today is going to be in government tomorrow.
Yeah.
That key NGO leader could be in government as well, but nonetheless, they're that person, that individual is fundamentally a leader and a thought leader. And so, while you might be accredited directly to another country, to another government, in reality, I think you're representing the United States more broadly to society. Right. It's important to speak to all parts of society.
Yeah, I think that's I think I sang Harmony on the get out of the ministries. We have a lot of people watching us who aspire to the Foreign Service, and a number of questions kind of get to the, what do I need to do to prepare myself? What books should I read? What articles? Somebody even said, what movies or TV shows? I'll leave it to you whether to do that, or whether that captures our job. I have my views. But what you mentioned, that when you were growing up in Leesburg, Florida, that you read a lot. You read a lot of history. I presume you read a lot of newspapers and really tried to learn about that world outside of the orange groves. What kind of things, sources, culture, books, if you had a junior sitting here, a junior undergrad, what would you tell them? This is what you need to do to really be ready.
Well, going back to the TV shows, I can't watch them because after 10 minutes, I start bristling. You can't.
No, I know. Yeah, I know. There's one in particular that I'm kind of going, no.
It's hard for me to suspend reality.
Yeah.
And so I spend a lot of time sort of on the edge of my seat saying that can't happen.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I don't, there aren't any popular television shows that I know of right now. And I think that it'd be hard to look at that. I mean, as a young kid, I'll be honest, we had a set of encyclopedias before the internet on our bottom shelf.
Yeah.
And I started with A and I went all the way to Z.
Yeah.
And basically absorbed everything that I could about the world that was outside of my small town. I wouldn't advise somebody to do that now, but it was a way that I could bring in different bits of information that I couldn't necessarily with one particular book or the like. Before I took the Foreign Service exam years ago, I read Modern Times by Paul Johnson. And it did a very good job of laying out 20th century American history.
Mhm.
And in many ways, filling in gaps for me that, you know, at that time, we knew a lot about up to Vietnam, but I wasn't,
Yeah.
as a young person, taught about Vietnam because it was such recent history.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine, for you and me, we talk about 9/11 as if it just happened, but for students, sort of it's that big gap.
Yeah, it happened before some of my students were born.
Yeah, that I think can be challenging. And so I would say sort of look at that reading that you can digest that provides you a good understanding of what's happening now or what's happened more recently. I recently reread the book The Vulcans, which was about Richard Armitage and others in the George W. Bush administration,
right.
During the lead up to the Iraq War and their relationship. I also worked for Strobe Talbot. So when I worked for some of the greats. When I came into the staff, I was working for Strobe Talbot, and he has a very good, yes, some amazing writings as well. So I've made a point of seeing what my bosses have written sometimes now about experiences that I had. So but obviously look at quality news. I mean, The Economist. NPR, see what's happening and don't just look at what's happening immediately, but look at what's behind it. And it's a critical part. The analysis that actually comes with it, as opposed to just the news itself, which becomes more complicated, and then try to study history to the extent possible backwards, so you understand it. But that's what Georgetown's the School of Foreign Services is good. Well, I think any decent public policy school, but I think I do want to underscore it because I do think it's critically important is first of all become a lifelong learner. Second, read, and that does not mean social media. Right. It means these things these things called books. And really delve into history because I think we all, for each of us, history began the day we became politically aware, which is somewhere around 8th grade, maybe, somewhere in there. But whatever finally got you politically aware in the 8th grade has a long history to it. And so, read as much history as you can. Read, as you said, critical commentators, read analysis, not just the headlines. Yeah. When I was in the 8th and 9th grade, that was during the Iran hostage crisis. Oh, yeah. And that was when I actually first learned about embassies, what's happening. Yeah. And watched it intensely, but then also did what I could to figure out, how did we get there? Why was this happening? That was a seminal for me. So it's interesting that you say 8th grade. Yeah, it's I actually had a student who in the previous place who was explaining to me how an issue, became important then. And I said, that's coincident with when you became politically aware. Let me assure you, there was a lot going on before that day. And that's not to be condescending. That's just to say, you need to understand the roots. Right. And you get that through history, through good commentary, through credible media. Yeah. And I think some of it also is just learning how to critically evaluate what are credible sources, and not necessarily the most exciting. Yeah. Yeah. One other question that has come up is the Foreign Service has changed over the decades. It has changed in any number of very important ways. And as we have in our introduction, increasingly, maybe not fully, but increasingly does represent the broad strokes of American culture. And you have been very much involved in one of those groups, really bringing it to the forefront and making sure that it was heard, seen.
how is that, how would you describe the evolution and that change?
Well, I had the opportunity to be an early member and a leader at different junctures of an organization called GLIFA, Gays and Lesbians in Foreign Affairs Agencies. Now we're out in national security, so they
Right.
changed the description to be more inclusive. But in the early 90s, we were really coming out of what was the Lavender Scare. And I have some friends who were still being investigated simply because of who they were, their sexual orientation. Over time, this organization grew in size, but also, I would say, was able to operate in a way that truly had an impact on the Foreign Service with regard to inclusiveness. Our early fight was simply to be able to be out and gay in the Foreign Service. Then to ensure that that we became an integral part of the State Department's EEO policies, set of policies, so that people learned about what it meant, and but also learned how to operate in a way that was non-discriminatory. Then we worked in various ways to ultimately secure the first benefits for same-sex partners in the U.S. federal government in history. And we did this, through our organization and through interactions directly with the State Department, including at senior levels. I would say that in many ways we were transformative during the first, during Obama's first year in office, when the first Pride Month came and the White House was looking for a declaration of what it had achieved. About 75% of what it achieved had been what had happened at the State Department.
That's remarkable.
And so, I think the rest of the LGBT people throughout the United States are saying, well, what passports for same-sex partners of diplomats? What does, what is the impact on that? But I think in many ways we showed the administration that they could move forward on a set of issues and expand it more broadly.
And showed other agencies, our sister agencies too.
Exactly. And then the second time I was president of this organization, it was a Pride event at the State Department, and Secretary Clinton spoke at it, and it was the first time she said gay rights are human rights are gay rights. You're talking about sort of having a front row seat to history. Then you're in the room. Here I am, chairing this event, and the most visible and powerful woman in the world at the time was making this important declaration that I think transformed things in many ways. Now, by extension, I would say she meant LGBT rights, and so it's much more inclusive. But we were really able to be transformative and to form a community. That organization has since it ceased operations inside of the State Department and has moved some operations out to the extent that that's been able to happen. But it still continues. Yeah, and over time, we saw the Foreign Service and the State Department and USAID become much more inclusive and be a place where I, as an openly gay ambassador, could be confirmed by the Senate, and for that to not be an issue. And for me to be able to operate in a way that was true to who I am as a person, but also I think in many ways helped serve as a model for others out there as well.
Well, I know you've had many successes as an FSO, but you have also changed the department. And I would put that in your success column.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask one last question very briefly.
Sure.
If your Leesburg, Florida self was standing in front of you, what would you tell him based on?
I would tell him it's going to be okay.
Okay, that's a good answer.
And I would tell him that the challenges he has, or this kid who realizes somehow he's different, that he's going to be able to achieve his dreams. And that 8th grader who says he wants to be an ambassador, who didn't even know what it was going to be, that if he sticks with it, and if he's a good colleague, if he remains focused on his goal, that he'll get there. And I think that kid from Leesburg would be quite satisfied with ultimately what happened.
That kid from Leesburg, Florida would be very lucky to have had you as his mentor.
Thanks so much.
And thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a tremendous opportunity and a great conversation. And I can't thank you enough for giving us your time and your insights and your wisdom.
Well, thank you to you and for this fantastic program.
Thank you. Yes, we like this program.
Great.
But it's because we can bring people like you and then share it. And it will be shared.
Super.
So thank you so much and good luck. And we will stay in touch.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And for all of you, goodbye and thank you. And I know we've had up on the screen how you can access our library with now 50 interviews with people like Ambassador Gilchrist and others. So we see you next month. And thank you all for being part of this program.